So I'm back after a bit of a long stretch to share the rest of the story. Finally found a beautiful spot, Basona Park, which is near our home. And I thought I would just continue the story and share where it went and where I've been since that last journey. So I ended with when they announced that it was in Vipassana, 10-day silent retreat, and they had rang the bell or kind of ended the course. And I was hitting all the milestones of, some of the stages of enlightenment. And my higher self had come in and she was still like moving me, I could feel in my system where there was points of rigidity, and it was releasing as I moved. And there was subtle movements that I started doing while I was in the hall. So they said that it ended and that, they were going to end the noble silence and that, maintain it in the hall, but anybody that wanted to leave the hall could now, talk again and they would end the noble silence. But if you wanted, you could continue in the room, in the group hall, wanted to meditate until lunch. So I continued. There were still other people in the room. And what was interesting was, and I don't know if I'd mentioned this in the last round, but the previous day, I had my higher self had started taking me down the path when I was in my room of creating all these different objects, and it was an elaborate process. Each one was like building ceramics, and essentially, it was like collecting and toning and heating the energy to create these different objects at each of the chakras. So, for example, I had like a tube that went out from my fifth chakra out into the aura, which was then integrated in. Then there was like a barrel size from my second chakra. And so I was just observing and going through it, and then I was getting really tired, actually fatigued from doing it for so many hours during the day and wondering what the hell all of that was. And then I kind of said to them, like, in the hall, I can't be making large movements. It's not allowed. You're not supposed to be moving in the hall. So then I thought it might end and I would go back to the, melting of the knots and like experiencing the meditation. But then even when I got into the hall, under my shawl, it was then they were creating, my hands were moving on their own, creating these small spheres in front of me. And I was like, what is this? It's like, and they were almost like fractal size, like small little spheres that were being created that took the same amount of time as the larger ones, like full ceramics kind of development, but they were tiny. And there was like a half a dozen of them in front of me. I wasn't sure, is this a constellation or like, what is this? So anyway, coming back to this moment, my higher self kicked in. So if I took a deep breath, this is they call the bell and we're continuing the meditation. As I took a deep breath, I was like feeling where there was rigidity in the system and then just kind of melting the knots. And then, so every time I took a deep breath, I would feel it in my body and then I was just releasing it. And if I let my hands be free, I was also like clearing some of the energy to accelerate the process of kind of melting those additional sankharas or those knots. And then I noticed, like, at one point I stopped taking the deep breaths and I stopped, my hand stopped moving. And my hand went out, my finger went out to one of these now spheres, these tiny little spheres that I created the previous day that I didn't know what they were for. Went out to one of them and started moving, like this kind of movement. And I noticed when it would move, like it would move a little, like small movements, and my body would move like in some like very precise angle. Then I realized it was almost like a mouse, like a remote control, some kind of advanced technology that had been created, that when it moved the mouse, my body would move like at a very precise angle. So it was like tweak, 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 tweak. And then in the spot that it came to, I'd hear like one of those chiropractic cracks. So it was almost like getting to the exact precise spot to release a particular sankhara that was in my body, that I was in awe of how they were creating this technology. So anyway, that continued for some time. Then they called the lunch bell, and everybody left. I was the last one in the room, and I was like, screw lunch. I'm going to skip lunch. This is too amazing. I want to see what happens. I feel like maybe I'm close to whatever's coming up next, and so I'm going to keep going. So at that point, I felt like I could get up. I didn't have to like pretend I was standing still and just do it under my shawl. So I stood up and I started being led through full yoga positions and movements to release. And I kept hearing cracks and snaps and like releasing of these sankharas in my system. So I was doing that. Then about 15 minutes later, I started hearing someone come in the door and I quickly sat down in my seat. And it was one of the course managers. So she came over and she interrupted me and said, hey, they called lunch a few minutes ago. If you want to come in and grab some lunch. And I said, I'm in the middle of something really amazing. I'm just going to continue here. I'm not going to worry about it. She's like, I really think you should come and get lunch. Break the silence. Come on up. Break the silence and enjoying the rest of the group. Say hi to Baloo. He joined me. You say hi, Baloo. Say hi, Baloo. Say hi. And I was just looked at her, like, in my head I was thinking, like, I'm like on the verge, like I'm meeting milestones of enlightenment, dude. Like, there's no way in hell I'm gonna skip that for lunch. But like, I couldn't say that. I think she would have thought I was crazy, and I don't know. I didn't feel comfortable saying it, so I didn't say it. But that's what I was thinking in my head. And then she must have picked up on something. She's like, okay, but there's no obligation. It's totally up to you. But I would highly encourage it. And then she's like, but you're gonna have to leave the hall. It's like, why? She goes, well, we need to clean it up, and like the course is over now. So I was like, but I can meditate in my room, right? She's like, I really think you should get lunch. So I kind of left, feeling triggered actually. On my way to my room, I'm like, why don't I just stop and grab a handful of nuts? Because maybe she's right. I'll want to eat some food later, and there won't be any available. So I went in. It was like a roar. The amount of people, like noise that there was, that people talking and breaking the silence, and I could feel like it was overwhelming. So I grabbed a handful of nuts and I quickly ran over and went to my room, shut the door, and I thought, okay, now I can just comfortably like move around the space and do the yoga positions that I was getting led through. Within a couple of minutes, there's a knock on the door. It's like, what the hell? Open the door. She's like, I really think you should come and get lunch. I was like, what the hell is going on here? So then I say, like, I would like to have autonomy over my own body and decide how I want to treat it. And, I was obviously quite triggered. It's like, all right, but the teacher wants to see you. It's like, for what? Skipping lunch? And she was like, I don't know, but she wants to see you in like 15 minutes. I'm like, fine. Shut the door. Slam the door. Shut the door. Go inside. It's like, is this some kind of cosmic joke? I wonder if Buddha was interrupted in the middle of his enlightenment to say, like, hey, dude, you got to come and stop and come and have lunch. So I'm sitting there thinking, like, this is almost too ridiculous to be real. Then it occurred to me, it's like, wait a minute. Whenever anything seems way out of place, completely irrational or misplaced or even cartoon-like, there's more to the story. So I thought, well, it is an interesting coincidence that my greatest fear growing up, being like a total type, like straight A student, teacher's pet kind of thing, my greatest fear and nightmare would have been being called by the teacher because I'm in trouble. Never happened, and it would have been one of my worst nightmares. So I'm thinking, like, it's kind of interesting that that's like what's happening here. So I thought, okay, I'm going to surrender to whatever this is. Maybe I need to release something, old trauma from childhood or something, in order for me to get to the next stage. So let's just see what happens. So I start heading to the teacher, and I'm thinking, I'm just going to honor what arises. Let's see what arises. So I get to, the group hall where she's waiting inside, and they tell me to just sit down on the bench and wait because she's not ready for me. And as I'm sitting there, suddenly the thought comes into my head, like, oh my God, I'm violating all the rules. I was like doing yoga, writing stuff down. I had visualizations. Like, what if she's able to read my mind and figure it out? Like, maybe she'll be able to see right through it. So I started panicking, having like almost a panic attack. And my breathing like started getting really heavy, like fast and shallow. And I was like, oh my God, she's going to take one look at me and know that I'm hiding something. So I was having like basically panic attacks, like, oh my God, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? I'm like, all right, take a deep breath. I take one deep breath. And because I'd opened the channel for my higher self, instantly I could feel her presence in my system. And within one breath, my breathing came back to center. And so it was like back to like very calm breathing, very subtle breath. And the second breath, I could literally feel my heart pounding, like slowing down in my chest. And by the third breath, I was cool as a cucumber. And I thought, whoa, this is like Jedi mastery. And so they opened the door at that moment and said, the teacher's ready for you. And in my head, I thought, well, I'm ready for the teacher. So I went in. And, she kind of asked me how I was doing, and she said she heard that I wanted to skip lunch. And I said, well, I was in the middle of like really amazing. I was going past the stage that they described into what I think is something pretty amazing. And then she kind of latched onto like past, and that maybe I was a little too attached to the sensation or some experience, and I was skipping meals to do that. And so she said that, sometimes students get attached to what they're seeking, and then they skip meals, and and she said that we also want you to break the silence after 10 days and, speak to some people so you can be ready to go back into the world, tomorrow. And sometimes people who are shy struggle to, or they have a tough time kind of reacclimating And I said to her, I said, no one that I know would describe me as shy. And she's like, oh, really? And then she started having conversations with me, like, how was the course for you? And I could tell she was really trying to, you know, acclimate me and like help me, start getting me talking or whatever. Like she had made an assumption about the fact that maybe I was struggling to do that. And so, I was telling her about like my experience right outside the door and how I was nervous about getting in trouble and how I was able to, with 3 breaths, come back to center. And I was telling her about an experience in the hall that I had where, there was someone that was making a lot of noise, like breathing really heavily, like when they were meditating, and it was really distracting. And then the experience that I had where I ended up having this incredible learning from that. And she said, she was aware of that sound too. But after that, she realized I'm like completely fine. And I went on my way and I went back to the room and I thought, okay, now I can have some peace and quiet and actually see where this is going. What was really amazing was I was getting taken through these very specific and elaborate yoga moves that were very efficiently removing sankaras. And really efficient like places to like stretch different muscles, and then to do things like back bends and bridges and headstands, which I've never done before. And I thought when I could tell the position that she was putting me in was to do a headstand, and my head started going to the floor. I was like, I've never done a headstand. I don't even know how to do a headstand. Is this such a good idea? Like I might hurt my neck or something. But what was amazing was it would be like my head would go down and then I would feel like some, pain or misalignment, and then my head would come back up and it would be like tweak, 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 and keep trying different positions until it was the perfect angle, pretty efficiently and quickly. Perfect angle, and then my legs would go up and then again, and I ended up doing a headstand. I was completely in awe of. And so I was doing this, and then as I was doing, I was like, wow, this is the most incredible yoga session I think I've ever taken. I highly recommend everyone take a yoga class with their higher self. It's like having a healer, a chiropractor, and a yoga instructor customized to you, someone who knows your capability and knows when you feel pain and can come very efficiently. Like even if I would cramp, from going in a position, she would immediately bring it to an exact angle that would stop the cramping, and then tweak, 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 like do it enough so that it didn't create a cramp, with just a little bit of a tremor, and then move into the exact position or do the complete stretch. So I was in awe just watching it and going through it. And I said, this is an incredible yoga class, 10 out of 10. And then, I heard her say, like, just shut up and do the yoga moves. And then I thought, but I have one bit of feedback for you. She's like, okay, what's that? And so I was having this conversation now with my higher self. I said, you're this vastly intelligent, system that's able to like get me to do all these, it was like watching an AI, like tweak the right angle, trim tab to the point at which I could do these various elaborate moves. But you're like bumping into the furniture. I'm bumping into the furniture. Like, why aren't you accommodating the furniture? Why do I have to move myself? And then I heard her say, well, I want you to feel like you're adding some value. So I just started laughing. And then she started accommodating for the furniture. And then I noticed at one point, like I was going on to the point where, I was doing such aggressive, like positions, getting into them, that I started feeling like aches and pains in my back. And then like my hand started getting the healing energy or heat out and was like putting it. And it took like 45 minutes to like heal like one spot. I was like, what kind of planetary healer am I going to become if I can't even heal like a little tension in my back? And then I heard her say like, oh, no. I have all the power in the world. I can only bring in as much as you have capacity for. So as you release more sankaras and you clear your system, more healing capability can come into your system. I was like, okay, I get it. And then after doing this for a couple hours, I'm like, man, I am really tired. I'm going to take a break. Is that okay? Like, I want to eat some of these nuts that I picked up and like take a short break. And she's like, of course. Like, I'm just here to serve you. I'm just trying to keep us on schedule. I was like, what schedule? And then she says, you wanted to reach enlightenment by the end of this workshop. And I was like, okay, but not like at the expense of killing me. Like, aren't you my higher self? Don't you take like well-being and like into account? And then what she told me that was so interesting is that until I clear all the other sankaras, like she's like, the higher self isn't going to just take over. You still have free will. Higher self is a part of you, and it's becoming more dominant as you clear the old sankaras, the old beliefs, the old traumatized parts of yourself. As you clear them and heal them, your higher self can have more predominance in your system. So some of these old beliefs that are still there, and she showed me one of them. It's like, I'm a type 3 in the Enneagram, so it's all about accomplishment, recognition, reward, results. So there were times in my life, many of them, where I would skip sleep. I would totally disregard my body's needs and work, stay up all night and do work or whatever, try to achieve the outcome or whatever. And so that was like a phenomenon that was happening here. I'd set this goal and my system, that belief was still pretty strong in my system, that sankara. So it was overriding my higher self. And it was like, having me do all this stuff. And so then what I started doing was, I said, okay, I get it. Until I clear them out, I have to be a little bit specific. So I said, okay, I need to end at 3 o'clock so I have some time to like change and, freshen up before I go to the meditation. Or, and then she would end exactly at 3 o'clock with the warm down or cool down or whatever. So I started learning how to interact with my subconscious, my higher self. And as I kept clearing, I could kind of surrender and trust. And as I was doing these yoga moves, then, it continued was, one point I saw they were actually bruises on my thighs from trying to move melt the knots of my stretch marks, to see if I can get rid of the stretch marks. So I saw that. And then I heard her say, like, so was that your, what did she say? She said it's like enlightenment for like the Real Housewives of Beverly Hills. And I started laughing. I was like, I was getting a little desperate. She's like, I could see that. So she was like cracking these jokes. It was really funny. And I was like, what else can you do that's guided? She's like, well, I can. She's like, I'm like, can you do other things that are guided? She's like, yeah. Can you go do guided sex sessions? And she was like, yes. I was like, oh my God, this is going to be so much fun. So anyway, I continued that and then ended up heading back. And when I got back, and I'll end it with this, and then we can continue into new journeys, I wasn't sure if I was worried that I was going to lose it when I got back. And what I noticed when I came back was my triggers were like 80 or 90% reduced. So things that would normally trigger me with my husband or my son or whatever didn't trigger me. And I was able to have these conversations with him that I've never been able to have before. And I realized that he would ask questions and like suggest things that were like completely resonant to what I needed to hear or what I needed to see in that point in my journey. But because I was getting triggered before, I couldn't see it. So as an example, he was like, I think, you had like a hallucination, like these are psychosomatic, like improvements that you've had, placebo effect, like breakthrough in stretching. That's as far as he got. I feel like you had a breakthrough in stretching, which was pretty hilarious to me because it was so much more than that for me, certainly. And then when I didn't react to it like I normally do, then it's like he said, with anesthesia, people's bodies become very fluid, and it's because their basal activation has been dropped, quite a bit. So maybe this meditation technique allows you to, kind of reduce your basal activation, so your body becomes more fluid. And I was like, that is super interesting. Can you measure that? He's like, only in labs and in hospitals. And so then the thought that immediately came to my mind was, this is a metric and a potential instrument that could be developed in the effort of like understanding. Like my feeling was that when you get to a certain level of basal activation, that's when you can start to heal different types of illnesses, injuries, and disease. And maybe you have to get to a certain depth of, or, lowering of the basal activation before you can, do other healings. So I was just completely in awe of and fascinated by, the exchange that occurred when my triggers dropped. And then there were all these fascinating things that were occurring. Like when I got back, I could feel the vibrations of crystals. I've never felt that before. When I would play my crystal bowls or Tibetan bowls, like it sounded nice before. But now when I did it, right after that retreat, I could literally feel different parts of my body vibrating based on what note it probably was. When I listened to what the Bija mantras, these are this mantra that's played. I heard about it from a cousin of mine who pointed me to this woman whose name I've forgotten now. Oh, Kulreet Chaudhry, who was this neurologist that found that these Bija mantras, which are the seed sounds of each chakra put into a mantra, she found that when her patients would listen to it for, like 20 minutes, I think a day, they started having much more accelerated healing. It improved their healing quite a bit. And she ended up publishing studies and writing this book called Sound Medicine. Anyway, before I went, he'd pointed this out to me, and I purchased the sounds from her website, and I had listened to them, and I didn't do much. And I thought, well, I probably have to listen to it repeatedly. When I came back and I listened to those same sounds, I literally started feeling like involuntary movements, almost in dance form, moving through my body. I mean, it was phenomenal. And even, in fact, at one point, my hands were moving at different points along, like you can see here, different points along my body. And then I realized when I looked it up that each sound it was moving at the same level of the chakra, that the sound was the same frequency as. I mean, it was amazing. So there were all these shifts that started occurring. And when I came back, it's like the night that I got back, I was like still feeling pretty sore from all the yoga that I'd done the last couple of days while I was there. And so I was like, man, I'm so sore. It would be great if I could have my higher self like do some yoga for me so I could get rid of these really tight, like the tension in my body because it was so tight. And then I'm like, I wonder if I could do it. And I took a couple of deep breaths and then she was there. Then she took me through yoga positions automatically as I was sitting there in bed. And then when I went to sleep that night, I was still in bed. I was really drawn to doing more yoga positions and stretching and releasing more sankharas. At one point I got out of bed. I went out into the family room. It was like the middle of the night because I was just feeling so much wanting to move. And when I went out there, what was fascinating was first it was just my hands, my arms that were moving in almost like dance-like form. And immediately what I recognized was it was the exact same movements that I experienced in the ayahuasca journey, but at a slower pace. And it almost felt like, oh no, that's what it was. As I was lying in bed and I was like trying to sleep and I couldn't sleep and I was like still moving, slight movements to like release sankharas or these tensions in my system. And all of a sudden I got this image of myself as like a caterpillar in a cocoon, like I was moving like that or something. And then I suddenly felt drawn to going out into the living room and I started having these slight movements. And then all of a sudden I saw my hands as like the wings were opening of this caterpillar that's coming out of the cocoon. I mean, it was fascinating to watch. And they started moving in the exact same movements, but slow motion of the same movements I had in the ayahuasca journey when I was moving to the music. So it was almost as if that was the blueprint and now this was the unfolding of that same experience. Or it was like a foretelling of this unfolding of me going from the caterpillar into the butterfly through these movements. Initially, it was just in my arms that were moving, like the wings of a butterfly. And then my legs, and I realized because in all these ayahuasca journeys and at Vipassana, I was sitting. So only my upper body had moved and released all of the blocks that allowed me to have all these elaborate movements. But my legs hadn't really moved. So what started happening was my legs started moving slowly. And over the course of that week, I started doing leaps and spins and like feeling vibrations through my whole body, not just through my upper body. That was fascinating. And then food, I could feel the vibrations of foods. Like I noticed, like, in fact, the day I got back, I had a burger because it was completely vegetarian while I was there. And I ended up feeling super ill. And then I realized I couldn't eat meat, alcohol, processed foods, processed sugar, pretty much the only thing that felt really good in my body were whole foods, like vegetable salads and smoothies. Like, in fact, when I had a salad, like there was one day that I was on my own at home, I started playing music and I just immediately felt like moving to the music. It felt so delicious to move. And then I went to go make my salad, I was eating it. As I was eating it, it felt like, I'm like, oh my God, I've never it's never tasted this exquisite. It was like the romaine lettuce tasted like raindrops and like rivers exploding in my mouth, or like the cherry was like full of flavor and like energy. I don't know how to explain it, but it was like a celebration. My body was like celebrating the freshness of the food. It tasted like ambrosia or something. Like it was like the most delicious food I think I'd ever tasted. And it was like, what in the world? But basically that's what I started happening. So there were all these shifts. And then I even started like, well, I'll share the next part about what started happening after that and from my next journey that I went to. But I hope you enjoy it. Thank you for joining me on the journey that I think is meant to be shared with others. And I look forward to chatting with you again. Thanks so much.